In 1940, the Imperial Japanese Army bombed China with fleas carrying the bubonic plague. The plague-infested fleas, bred in labs, were spread by low-flying airplanes upon Chinese cities in 1940 and 1941. This military aerial spraying killed thousands of people with bubonic plague epidemics. The Hafner Rotabuggy was a British experimental aircraft that was essentially a Willys Army Jeep combined with a rotor kite like those found on a gyro kite. It was designed by Raoul Hafner of the Airborne Forces Experimental Establishment, and the prototype was built by the Malcolm Limited at White Waltham in 1942. The Rotabuggy had a 12.4 meters diameter rotor, a tail fairing and fins, but no rudders. It required 2 men to pilot the aircraft, 1 to drive it as an automobile, and 1 to pilot it in the air using a control column. The Maus was a German design for a super-heavy tank by Friedrich Krupp. At 1,000 metric tons, the P-1000 would have been over 5 times as heavy as the Panzer VIII Maus and be the heaviest tank ever built. It was to be armed with naval artillery and armored with 25 centimeters of hardened steel. To compensate for its immense weight, the Maus would have been equipped with 3 1.2 meters wide treads on each side with a total tread width of 7.2 meters. The V3 was a German supergun that worked on the multi-charge principle, where secondary propellant charges are fired to add velocity to a projectile. The gun used multiple propellant charges placed along the barrel's length and timed to fire as soon as the projectile passed them. The Nazis planned to use the cannon to bombard London from 2 large bunkers in the Pas-de-Calais region of northern France. The BA-349 was a German point defense rocket-powered interceptor, similar to a surface-to-air missile designed by Erich Bachem. Launched vertically like a V-2, the interceptor was mainly controlled remotely and then aimed by the pilot at enemy aircraft. The only manned vertical takeoff flight took place on 1 March 1945, but ended in the death of the test pilot. Only 36 models were manufactured. Originating out of the need in New Zealand to build military hardware from available materials at the outbreak of World War II, the tank was constructed from corrugated iron mounted on a tractor. The first prototype was built on a Caterpillar D8 tractor and equipped with 7 Bren machine guns. Due to the lack of armor plate, corrugated plating was used in the expectation it would deflect bullets. The fire balloon was a hydrogen balloon launched by the Japanese containing either an anti-personnel bomb or incendiary bomb. They were designed as a cheap weapon intended to make use of the jet stream over the Pacific Ocean and drop bombs on American and Canadian cities, forests, and farmland. The balloons were ineffective as weapons, but their potential for destruction and fires had a psychological effect on the American people. The Bat Bomb was an experimental weapon conceived by a Pennsylvania dentist named Lytle S. Adams and developed in the United States. The bomb was a shell-shaped container that held scores of Mexican free-tailed bats. The bats were attached to small timed incendiary bombs and released from a bomber at dawn. The bats would roost in buildings and attics, then detonate via a timer to cause vast spatial fires in towns and cities. The Goliath tracked mine was a remote-controlled demolition vehicle used by the Germans in World War II. Capable of carrying 60 to 100 kilograms of high explosives, the vehicle was intended for tank demolition, disrupting dense infantry and the demolition of buildings and bridges. Goliaths were used on all fronts from as early as 1942 by the specialized Panzer and combat engineer units. Project Habakkuk was a British plan by Geoffrey Pike to build aircraft carriers out of pykrete, a mixture of wood pulp and ice. The carriers, nicknamed Bergships, were to operate as landing platforms for aircraft in the war against the German U-boats in the mid-Atlantic. A small prototype was constructed at Patricia Lake, Alberta that measured 18 meters by 9 meters, but the final design was to have a deck 610 meters long with a hull and 2 meters thick to withstand torpedo attack.